Thanks, everyone. When Jim invited me to come and speak on a Sunday morning, I thought to myself, my goodness, speaking Moths on a Sunday morning, how many would turn up? So thank you for coming, and you're not even all related to me, which is even better. So that's fantastic, because that's the thing with the Moths, isn't it? They don't get much love. They're quite well down there in the hierarchy of things, and I hope today now we're going to try and change that together. I think for most of us, it's not that we're particularly feel strongly about them, but they're just not on the radar. They're just, you never really thought about them, and they're flitting around your gardens and in your woods, and yet, we know nothing about them really, or they're not in our consciousness. And then, of course, for a percentage of people, they evoke a very strong reaction.
God, I'm freaking out.
I can assure you, this is the only time I was ever on TikTok.
Sleeping on the couch and I heard a little weird noise. And I think there's a moth in here.
I'm sure there is.
I saw something flutter.
It's a bit early now on a Sunday morning to be listening to that, isn't it? All right, okay. We'll let her at that. Enough of that. So look, what I want to do today, I want to show you, I want to share with you the stuff that I see when it's 5 o'clock in the morning and I'm up in the bogs and there's nobody around and I'm opening the traps and I'm looking at this astonishing stuff. And I just want to share that with you and really maybe champion them a bit. And every photograph you'll see here today, they're all taken by me in County Kerry, okay? So this is our Moths, really. And they are astonishing, absolutely astonishing. But it's not just a catwalk. I don't want to show you pretty pictures. I just want to spend a bit of time then maybe talking about what I think is the real cake, the real stuff is that they're incredible cycles, they're incredible ways that they avoid predation, they're incredible life strategies. And then we talk a bit about conservation and, the threats that they face and, maybe the good that they do and what we can do to maybe help them out and reflect on that and maybe leave here with a newfound understanding and stuff for Moths, Okay. So I'm not an entomologist, I'm not a zoologist or an ecologist, I'm just a regular Joe. I'm based in Kerry for nearly 20 years now, but I'm a proud Cork man. I'm from Youghal in East Cork. Yoo-hoo is right, and thank you, well done, nice one, we'll chat later. You're probably related to me. And this festival has been fantastic, and it's got me thinking a lot about education and articulation of passions and stuff. And I had a school teacher when I was 9, 10 or 11, Mick Sheehan, and I hear he's unwell, which is sad, but he was fantastic, and like he had us out on the beaches. This is in the mid 80s in Youghal, and he had us out looking at brent geese, looking at the rings on brent geese. We didn't know the difference between a goose and a swan, not to mind that these things came all the way from the Arctic and stuff, and he had us tracing out the maps and looking at the migration routes, and it was incredible. And that for me, I suppose it hit a chord or something, and certainly the power of education, etc. And I had a real love of nature and birds in particular. And then, life kind of just went on, and I kind of lost a bit of that connection, moved away and further study and family and kids, and just time poor, or erroneously thought I was time poor. And then what happened was COVID happened, didn't it? And for all the horrors of COVID, for us as a family and me personally, I had all this time, to really gorge and reconnect, and that was something positive to come out of it, maybe. And then on one random evening, myself, we said we'd do a project, and we said we'd build a moth trap, and we set it up one evening. And I remember, we live in the centre of Killarney, and there's street lights to the left of us. There's neighbours to the right of us. It's a very hostile environment for a nocturnal insect. And I remember we set up the moth trap and saying to the kids, we're probably not going to see a couple of brown things. I didn't even know different species at that point. And then the next morning, there was this whopper. This is 5 in the morning. This is my son holding this. I barely knew it was a hawk moth. And, you could pick me up off the floor. I could not believe that in such a hostile environment that this was present. And I remember thinking to myself, my God, if that's what's here, imagine what's out there, in those woods and in those fabulous dark places and special places. And that became kind of a curiosity, a journey of curiosity to start with, which became a passion, and then it became a kind of an obsession, I suppose. But that's the thing there. And this is what we use. We use the term traps, but everything is unharmed and released unharmed. Basically, it's a bulb and a funnel and a box underneath. The moths ultimately fall into the boxes. They snuggle up in the egg cartons, kind of fall asleep. They think it's daytime. And that's an example of the kind of stuff that you can see. And you can see I'm wearing a latex glove there. Sometimes the biblical plague of midges has to be seen to be believed. On those sultry June nights where there's loads of moths, there are just millions of midges. I remember sitting in the car afterwards one day looking in the rear view mirror, and the whites of my eyes was actually black with midges in them. It was just horrendous. Horrendous stuff, but beautiful spots. That's the pleasure of it, isn't it? Going to those incredible areas. That's behind Cromaglen Mountain up near the Kerry, up on the Old Killarney Way there, and it's just an unbelievable spot, pristine environment, thousands and thousands of moths. So we'll go back to school briefly. My daughter drew this. And you can see the wing there, and that's the kind of the standard insect wing, isn't it? This kind of transparent membrane with veins on. But what makes a moth and a butterfly? The part of the group called Lepidoptera, big word meaning scaly wings. So they have that, but actually what they have is like tiles on the roof. So if you look at this is just one of the wings of one of our moths there. Look, a camera photographed on a microscope, and you can see all these tiny scales. And that's the wonder of it. Those scales are incredible. They allow an unbelievable, bewildering number of forms of markings to blend in. And they can be like big, so they can be like tufted and little projections, sticky out bits to break up the outline of the moth, which is unreal. And they provide an incredible service. They keep the moths warm by trapping air, which is kind of cool. But the thing which will really blow your mind is that they're soundproof. They're like an invisibility cloak in Harry Potter. You know, they cloak and they reduce the signature of the moths when they're hit by the bat sonar, which is incredible. And nanotechnology is getting so good now that they're actually copying this design to produce wallpapers, super light wallpapers based on moth wings to try and reduce sound reflection, which is amazing. And there we go. I'm a Cork man and I'm exiled in Kerry, so we can have a good chat about this later on. It's like the football, isn't it, last weekend? Yeah. Barely got away with it. Anyway, what's the difference between a moth and a butterfly? You know, it's a bit like the difference between a Kerry man and a Cork man, you know. There's certain characteristics that differentiate us, but actually all kind of the same. There's no easy answer to this question. It's a linguistic distinction. I'm talking about the moths and butterflies now. It's a linguistic distinction. There's no actual scientific difference between them. It's a kind of a peculiarity of English, actually. So like mushrooms and toadstools, there isn't a clear definition. So it's unfortunately, I don't have an easy answer to that. But in general, we know what moths are, don't we? We know what butterflies are. There are characteristics. We know they sit differently. They look different. You know, they've moths fly at night time, etc. That's the oak beauty on the top, which is a common moth of our oak woods. And that's the first generation holly blue there. I just took that photograph last week, flitting around the holly bushes there, up around where I live. And the last line there, of course, will make any self-respecting moth twitch uncontrollably, you know, because they're not more colourful, are they? Or maybe they are, I don't know. But they're far less interesting anyway. This is an example of a collection. I was photographing moths up in the hills there. My son, when I turned around, he had arranged a whole bunch of a tiny percentage of the catch. And you can just see there, look at that for a selection. Incredible, different shapes and colours. And Kerry is great. Kerry is fantastic. I'm talking about moths now. It's incredible for the moths. It's a big county. It's got fabulous diversity of habitat. You got your coastline, and not only have you got coastline, but you got sand dunes and shingles, and you got salt marsh, and you got cliffs, and you got mountains. And some of these have heather on, some of these are scree mountains, and these have all its different flavour. There can be different species associated with these, which is incredible. And in fact, we have one species now. It's a subspecies, fair enough, but it'll amaze you to know that it's only found on the Dingle Peninsula and nowhere else in the world, which is astounding. And what I said I'd do to keep my relatives in the room, we're going to give you that slide at the very, very end. So it's the very last slide. So there you go. 1,500 moth species in Ireland. Can you believe that? I mean, that's an astounding figure. We have 20 species of ant. We have about 100 species of bee. We have about 160 species of caddisfly. We have 32 species of butterfly. We have 1,500 species of moth. So by any stretch of the imagination, they're incredibly successful, incredibly diverse. you know, it's an opportunity now maybe to show you a few nice pictures of moths that are just, again, they're around your gardens, they're in the woods, they're up in the mountains, they're all around us. And look at that, a fairly lazy name in English, the orange moth, a beautiful Latin name, Angorona prunaria. Angorona was a Greek goddess. Prunaria for prune is the blackthorn. Beautiful. And look at that, the merveille du jour, the marvel of the day. What a great name. What else have we got here? We got the beautiful yellow underwing. That's a daytime flying moth. You're not meant to have favorites, or I'm not meant to have favorites, but this is my favorite, let's say that. And the reason being, myself and my son, we would have great fun trying to net these during the day. They're very flighty up in the hills, and it's all I can do to stop them falling off the side of the mountain trying to catch the things. But we do catch them occasionally, and it's just brilliant. The silver barred, look at the distribution map, if you can see that. It's only found in Kerry and adjacent parts of Cork, other parts of England as well, but this is a species of millennia. It's almost 3 years to the day now, isn't it, when we had those devastating wildfires in Killarney National Park, and all that great habitat where I used to see these in their hundreds was completely scorched. Now I'm glad to say that when I went back there last June, there's still plenty of these around, but no doubt it was devastating for the populations there. And this is a stunner. This is on a work morning. I was up early, checked the trap out there in the woods just on the road from me, and I nearly fell over when I saw this. There was only 5 previous records in the whole of Ireland, and the nearest spot to me was County Wexford, which is incredible. And I mean, what a stunning moth. And we found good populations of that since, which is fantastic. And then there's the white prominent. This is probably the most famous moth. If you can have a famous moth, that's a famous moth. And it was interesting hearing Rory Hodd yesterday talking about how collectors had collected Killarney fern to extinction in Britain. And this moth was collected to extinction also in Britain in the 1800s. The last remaining populations were recorded in Killarney National Park in the 1930s and around Glencar in the 40s and 50s, and then the trail went dead. And I'm glad to say that it was rediscovered in Glencar in the 1990s. There's a great population there. It seems to be doing quite well. I spent quite a while trying to find it in Killarney National Park, and I'd be looking in the winter time when the bracken is all down. I'd be looking at old birch and GPS-ing them, and then I'd go out in the flight season and to trap them. And eventually, I did succeed in finding the first one in Killarney National Park for nearly 100 years. And just so good to think that there's a separate, distinct population outside of Glencar. It'll amaze you to know, there's about a dozen people a year that come to Glencar specifically to see the white prominent moth. I mean, there is that sort of a strong community out there. And that's one of my gigs, to get from A to B. Sometimes I'm trapping next to the car. Sometimes I'm carrying traps up mountains, falling into bogs, getting torn by gorse, getting lost. That's a common thing. And then this is easy money. This is my electric bike, and I can pedal away down Inch Beach there, or in around the trails. And I've got tents, I've got traps, I've got cameras, I've got food, I've got cooker, I've got the whole shebang there. So you wouldn't see me for days. And some great spots. I was invited down to the Blaskets as part of an invertebrate survey group last year. And I mean, when the last boat leaves and you're alone in the Blaskets with, the place lit up like a Christmas tree. But it was just amazing. I mean, what an experience. We were troubled by Manx shearwater. They seem to be drawn into the trap, into the light, which is a nightmare. And getting pooed on and everything. But we got some great moths there as well. And I wouldn't trap as nearly as much as I do if it wasn't for Ulton, my son. He's great company. He comes with me. We go camping together, tents, back of the cars, up to the Burn, down to the south coast, all sorts of places. And he's great company, and it's just to share the whole experience, to share the moths. And he's a great mother too, great at telling the difference between species and pointing out stuff that perhaps he hasn't seen before. That's behind Udros na Gaeltachta in West Kerry, and a more stunning site I defy you to find. Okay, so I think we've kind of done the catwalk bit. We've done all the nice pretty pictures, and I just wanted to talk now a little bit about the detail, because for me this is really, really kind of amazing. So just that moths lay eggs, okay? Often they lay them in clutches like this, sometimes singularly. And when the caterpillar then emerges, after a little bit, it is game on, because everything wants to eat it, and particularly birds, and particularly blue tits. Blue tits have a very strong relationship with moth caterpillars, so much so that they will time their brood to the appearance and the emergence of the winter moth larvae, the winter moth caterpillars. And the numbers that they eat are staggering. the British Trust for Ornithology put in neck cams into nest boxes of blue tits, trying to see how many chicks. Can you imagine 100 caterpillars a day, and a blue tit would have maybe 10 chicks? That's 1,000 caterpillars a day. It sounds improbable. Now, they're not all moth caterpillars. They're sawfly larvae and butterfly caterpillars, but the numbers, if you think maybe a blue tit would have 2 clutches, maybe even 3 broods, I don't know, you're into nearly the billions in reality, just with the blue tit, of all the blue tits in Britain and Ireland. So the numbers are truly amazing. And if the blue tits don't get you, well then lots of other stuff will get you. And the parasitic wasps in particular are amazing. Now, I don't know, are there any young folk there? There's a few young people. So just to gross you out a little bit, check this out, okay? So the parasitic wasp are highly specialized predators of all sorts of stuff. But we're looking at the ones that feast on the moth caterpillars. And what they'll do is that they will inject their eggs. They'll seek out the moth caterpillars, no matter where they are. And you could be hiding under a tree, in a tree trunk, actually in the wood, deep in a flower. You're not visible, but the wasps will find where you are, and they will inject their eggs into the tiny caterpillar, okay? Now, the caterpillar doesn't die. The caterpillar keeps on growing, and all the while, as it's getting bigger and bigger, all the wasps, the baby wasps, the larvae of the wasps are growing inside it and eating inside it. And amazingly, it doesn't eat the vital tissues. So the moth caterpillar is growing away, getting bigger and bigger, and all the while it's stuffed full of wasp larvae. And then, on a bad day for the caterpillar, it clambers up to the top of a stem. Now, it would never dream of going up a stem like that, because we just picked off instantly by the birds, but somehow it's programmed to go up the stem, and it locks on like a death grip, and at that moment, all the wasp larvae burst out of it. And they immediately pupate, and I've taken these home. My wife doesn't know that. I've taken these home, and I put, looking at you, Fiona, and I put it in a jam jar, and after about a week, you can see all the parasitic wasps emerging out of those little white cocoons there. So the point I'm trying to make is that it's just a tough gig being a caterpillar, you know? That's for sure. But they don't have it all their own way, the predators. And there's nothing like tens of millions of years of predation pressure to produce an incredible array of strategies to avoid being dinner. For example, a lot of our moths caterpillars will only eat at night time. So, you know, you can just feed at night time and avoid all the hassle and the predation pressures. Sure, wainscot, there's a number of particularly species in open areas. A lot of them do feed at night time. And this guy, he's the color of sand because he buries himself in the sand during the day. Another way of doing it is to blend in. I mean, that's pretty good. This is quite a nice species for us because there's not so many moths in the middle of the winter, and this is one of them. And this particular female, or the female, going back a little bit, laid a pile of eggs in my trap, and we took them home and we cared for them and we fed them when they hatched and we watched them grow. And then after a while, we were able to watch them pupate. So they are actually, he's spinning a little cocoon, he or she, spinning a little cocoon. And sometimes they can even somehow take the hairs from their body and actually incorporate it into the cocoon. So then after a few hours, and she's nearly done, he or she, and there he is. Safely tucked up in there, will remain in there for 3 or 4 months. You know, might get flooded. They can put up with some inundation. They can put up with being dried out. And then in November, emerged. The other way, if you're a caterpillar, you can look nothing like a caterpillar. You can cover yourself in weird, sticky outfits, mad colours like that. That's possible. You can cover yourself in hairs. I mean, a blue tit that's going to get stuck in your throat, isn't it, trying to eat that? This is another example of a species that we reared from eggs that were laid in my trap. And some of them take the whole hairy thing to extremes. This is some of the tiger moths. You know these, the woolly bears, the hairy mollies. I know that Sam Bayliss is speaking after me on cuckoos, you know, because these don't have it all their own way. And actually the European cuckoo has figured out that actually if you manage to strip off the hairs by rubbing the caterpillar repeatedly against a roughened stone and strip it off, then you've got a nice lunch there. So they will be specialist predators of fox moth caterpillars, which are quite common in their habitats. I haven't seen that behavior, but that's what we're told. And what about if you were tiny? So I said to you there was 1,500 species of moth, so about like a third of those are kind of big ones, and about 2/3 of those are the small ones, okay? We call those the micro moths, and they can be very tiny. But if you're tiny, then you have a whole range of other strategies to avoid being eaten. So check this out. So this just looks like a bit of a twig. But if you look up real close, there's a caterpillar in there standing on its head. All right, so its head is at the bottom and it's eating away, happy as Larry. And what it's done is it's actually knitted a sticky sock for itself. And then onto the outside of that is glued little grains of seeds of grass and stuff, and little tiny little twigs. So these are what we call the bagworms, and we have a bunch of different species, and it's pretty well hidden there. Now, the other thing you can do, of course, is a bit like a kid with a cookie cutter. It can actually cut out little pieces of leaf and somehow manage to glue them on itself, and it's hiding in there again, standing on its head, eating happy as Larry. And these are specifics, these are coleophora, they're specific species. We call these caseberry moths, and amazingly, whether the species is found here in my woods in Derricunny or whether it's in France or other places, the shape is peculiar to that species. That's Ceratella, which is, again, that serrated edge. Amazing. And this is something you can do when you go home. You can look in the bramble at the end of your garden or in the hedgerow, and I guarantee you will find these squiggles. Okay? So you'll now think of me when you see that, and you'll say, God, that's caused by a moth, which is amazing. So what happens here is that you have this tiny little moth lays an egg on the bramble leaf, okay? And then what happens is that the caterpillar comes out, it's tiny and it's flat, and it goes straight into the leaf itself. So it interposes itself between the top and the bottom part of a leaf, so in the middle, in the parenchyma, can you imagine? And then like Pac-Man, it's eating away. It starts real small, like on the top right, and then it's eating away, getting bigger and bigger and bigger, bigger and bigger and bigger as the weeks go by. And then at the very end, it's fully formed, full adult or full larvae, and then it'll pupate and emerge. It only lives for a couple of hours. This particular species, Stigmella aureata, just lives for a couple of hours. So very hard to find the adults. We look, the nerds among us look at leaves, different species, and you can figure them out with the different squiggles and all the rest of it. But the thing is, if you're eating leaves, if you're living in a leaf, what we call leaf miners, is that the leaf falls off. So that's no good to you, is it? But what about this? What about if you're able to produce, not toxins, but chemicals in order to prevent the leaf from stripping the chlorophyll from around you? So you can pick these leaves up in October. They're like, especially in the dark wood there, you can see them and they're glittering out from the ground, these little green islands. So amazingly that the caterpillars, and it's actually what's even more amazing, it's not the caterpillar itself, but some of them have a commensura, a bacteria within them, and it's the bacteria that produce the chemicals to prevent the leaf from dying off, which is cool. All right. Are you all mothed out? Maybe a little. So we've had the egg, we've had the caterpillar, it's avoid being eaten. It's avoid being eaten by the birds and by the parasitic wasps, and it's done it all, and now it's an adult, okay? And it's in your woods and in your gardens. But of course you don't see them because they're hidden. And my goodness, there's nothing like the moths to show you some incredible responses to being eaten and kind of strategies to camouflage. We call this crypsis, so that's blending in there. You can see birch mocha moth. And it's even got those the pink stripes that the silver birches have, which is amazing. Minor shoulder knot, that's a rare moth. We find those in the oak woods outside Kerry National Park. It's only found in County Kerry and up in Northern Ireland. Now what about this? This is a species of coasts, of rocky coasts, and it'll kind of seek out these areas of lichen and sit there. Pretty subtle. The Merveille du jour I was telling you about, up in the top there, lichen coloured. Beautiful blending in, and often in the autumn we'll see kind of these motley ones with bits of yellows and pinks. You could just imagine as the leaves are turning colour. It's pretty good. Or in the early part of the season, before you get all that greenery, you have a lot of brown. So you get a lot of brown moths, powdered Quaker. That's a lovely name, Quaker. Quakers were a religious group, of course, and they were kind of sober dressed, kind of modest, rustic dressed browns, and nothing too showy. And we've a bunch of moths which are kind of reference that, which is a nice echo to the past. And of course, the other way is not only, you can try to blend in with the background, but another way of doing it is to try to kind of maybe to look like something you're not, mimicry. So the head is up here. This is, you can see its eye looking down. Buff tip moth, that's a very common moth that we see. And we have a whole host of other ones that look little bits of twigs or broken twigs and stuff. So they're hiding in plain sight. If you just knew where they were, you can pick them out. Or it looks like bird dropping. That's another way of doing it. Look like a bird dropping. Or another way of doing it is to say, to hell with you all, here I am, have at me. And these particular ones are quite a common daytime flying moth, and they're poisonous. And the reason they're poisonous is because of their caterpillars. Now, my kids would have called these the Croaks caterpillars. They're black and amber, if you're familiar. That's the GA jerseys. You might call them the Austin Stacks ones, is it Ravi Dourney or whatever you have. So they are prodigious predator or eaters, feeders of ragworts, and you can see them, and they're amazing. I've put nets over the ragworts, and you could have 10 or 12 caterpillars. And the thing is that when they're finished eating all the leaves and the caterpillars, then they turn on themselves, and you can start off with 12, you might end up with 2 very fat ones, which is incredible. And they absorb the alkaloids, the poisons, the noxious chemicals that are in the plant. And so nothing wants to eat them. And actually, interestingly, ragworts has become a problem in New Zealand, where it's been introduced, and they've actually introduced the cinnabar moth larvae. What can possibly go wrong there? But they've introduced them to try to keep back as a biological control, which is amazing. That's not a wasp, that's a moth. Lunar hornet moth. So if you saw those, if you're a predator, you believe in that well enough alone. But that doesn't sting or anything, it's just a moth. And then you have the ultimate arms race, The moths had it good for about 50 million years, and then the bats came along, and then it was really game on there. And the bats, clever people will look at the droppings from the bats, and they'll run them through DNA barcoding, and moths are a significant part of the diet of bats, particularly around Killarney National Park, where there's a lot of woodland. You get a lot of moths at the predominant diet there, So it's a tough gig, It's a tough for the moths. But again, the bats don't have it all their own way. And what's happened is that the moths have evolved ears. Now, they're not like ears like you and I have. They're not ears that are on their heads. They're actually on their bodies. So when the wing lifts up, they can hear. And they're finely attuned to the bat sonar. So when the bat sonar hits the moth drops like a stone. Amazingly. It just drops like a stone, which is incredible. And not only that, but then we have an even more clever evolution here. So I don't know, do you recognize that? Garden tiger moths are quite common, doing very badly, its numbers, unfortunately. But there's a very common worldwide group. And the garden tiger moth can produce sound itself. So it actually produces sound, which is amazing. So when the bat sonar hits it, you know what it does? It gives it right back. It actually produces clicks which sound a bit like the bat sonar, throws it right back at the bat. The bat can't deal with it. Now, I have a little video showing that. I just hope it plays okay. So on the left-hand side, you've got a bat, and on the right-hand side with the circle, you've got the tiger moth, okay? So we're going to see the bat trying to eat the tiger moth, all right? So we listen at the start, you'll hear the clicks. I'll run it twice, maybe, so we can hear if the sound isn't loud enough. So you'll hear the clicks of the bat first, and then you're going to hear the clicks of the moth, giving it right back in spades. So let's see. And it's a miss. Amazing. We'll run it once more. Incredible. And what's also incredible is that they don't even have it their own way, because the brown long-eared bat, a long-eared bat we have in Ireland, so its response to this carry-on, all right, is that when it gets quite close to the moth, it actually switches off its sonar completely, goes into stealth mode, and it uses its gigantic ears. Just when it's a few inches away, it just uses its ears because it's that close. So I'm afraid, unfortunately for the poor tiger moth, it's game over. We're mostly there now, okay? But I just wanted to show you, these are kind of just a couple of random slides of stuff which when I kind of realized this stuff was going on, it kind of blew my mind a little bit. We have moths in Kerry which live in the water. Okay, we have what are called aquatic moths. We have 4 species here, but there's hundreds of them worldwide. Some of them are called the China mark because of the beautiful patterning on them. So what they do is most of the time it's just their larvae, their caterpillars will actually live in the water. The females will lay their eggs on water lilies, and the caterpillars will amazingly enter into the water. Some of them have these external plastron gills, which is pretty amazing. We've got moths have no wings, so the females have no wings. Can you imagine that? These are often winter moths, or moths that live in the winter time. And basically what's happening there is that there's not a whole lot of nectar out there, so kind of what evolution is kind of saying, well, look to the female. If you don't have any wings, and you don't need to fly, because there's not really a whole lot of food out there, well, then why don't you can be kind of thicker and heavier, and you have more of a chance then of your eggs making it. So they're kind of sacrificing fertility over locomotion. A beautiful name, spring usher moth, a rare moth that we see in the oak woods. This is only photographed just the other day, really, which is amazing. we know birds have courtships, so why don't insects? Well, of course they do. You've got kind of mating groups and leks and stuff like this. The trouble with the moths, of course, is in the middle of the night, and if you shine a torch on something, you disturb their behavior. So we don't know, and I would love to know, and maybe someday with technology, there'll be a way to figure out what's going on. But we have courtships. Look at this. So this is a male, and he's just doing this wonderful pendulum mating. And you can see this in those kind of rushy fields, you know, maybe a half an hour before it's dark in June and July. Beautiful goldsmith moth. And what's driving it crazy? Well, this is what's driving it crazy. Underneath, where he's doing his little dance, you've got a female. And amazingly, the female has these incredible brushes on her legs, these tibial brushes, they call them, and she's pushing out pheromone and driving the male crazy. And you can watch this, and it's amazing. Which is pretty special to witness. The other thing which I couldn't believe is that we have moths that migrate. Did you know that? Moths that come all the way from the continent, heck, even North Africa, which is amazing. Amazing numbers. And I know, you know, Sam has managed to use satellite tagging on cuckoos, but I wonder, you know, maybe someday if the technology, wouldn't that be interesting to know where they come from? 200 million silver white moths estimated to come to the UK every year, traveling 300 kilometers a day. Mind-blowing stuff. And if you're as nerdy as I am, we have apps and we have a lovely community of us, you know, and if we see in the late season the south winds coming up, remember last September with all the Sahara dust? Well, my God, that carries moths in their millions as well. So this is just a selection which I trapped on September. These are all moths which belong in North Africa or in the Mediterranean basin. I mean, the moth on the top right there, that's called the olive tree pearl. Olive tree is what it feeds on, and it's there in a bog outside or a marsh outside Clonakilty. And look at those colours. They're not to blend in with the greenery of Ireland. They're to blend in with the desert sands, you know, and the arid soils. This is the Vestal moth because of the Vestal virgins with the sash, the red sash. What a lovely name. And we were even lucky enough to find the biggest hawk moth that comes to Britain and Ireland, the convolvulus hawk moth. It's just the size of a sparrow. It's flying along there. And that was a very special occasion. So we're nearly done, just a few slides left. And I suppose, it's not that I'm leaving the most important stuff to last, but I suppose it's if we have a greater understanding and an appreciation for the moths, I suppose conservation comes as part of that. The moths do a pile for us. They are so important. They are crucial for supporting biodiversity, so much so that they're considered a key indicator of a healthy habitat. So for example, in Killarney National Park, where they undertake conservation measures, excluding deer, taking out the rhodo, I come along and I moth trap at day 1, for example, after they've done the conservation measures, and then we come back again year 2, year 4, year 6, and you'll see, hopefully, we're in the middle of a project, an interesting one at the moment, but you're going to be seeing an explosion, hopefully, in the quantity and quality and diversity of moth species. Because everything wants to eat them, you know? We talked about the blue tits, we talked about the bats, we talked about the insects. They're like the plankton of the forest. Billions of moth larvae, billions of adult moths hoovered up. So if you've got that much of a prey item, of course, you're going to have that much of the predators, and everything else rolls on like that. Plankton of the forest. The other thing, of course, with the moths is that they eat tons of stuff, don't they? They eat vast amount of green stuff, and you have to have that. You can't just have, like in a wood, you just can't have unchecked growth of green stuff because everything gets choked up and the most vigorous wins. No, what you need is you need to have selective grazing. Now, obviously, herb or like deer and stuff do take some green stuff, but nothing's getting at all that range, that diversity of the herbs, herbivory, the ecologists will call this. But what's going to amaze you is that caterpillars don't just eat green stuff, they eat tons of other stuff. They eat fungi, they eat rotten leaves, they'll eat detritus that's left in nests, they'll eat lichen, they'll eat rotten wood, and we have a bunch of species that eat keratin. And why do they eat keratin? Well, these are carrion feeders, so these have evolved to deal with the dead animals and the woolly, the sheep and stuff. And this stuff, the wool and the coating and the hides are rich in keratin, and this is what the moths eat. So when people talk about clothes-eating moths and the moths that are eating your clothes, they have no interest in eating your clothes. They're after the keratin. And if we implant ourselves on their environment, well, then it's as easy for them to eat the wool that's in your carpets or the wool that's in your clothes as it is for the wool that's on the dead deer or whatever else. And probably one of the most important things with moths, of course, is that the adult moths will drink pollen, or they'll drink nectar. And in doing so, they'll be a pollinator. And if I said to you that maybe 1% worldwide of food crops are pollinated by moths, you know, suddenly people will sit up a little bit and take a bit more attention to our moths. And the relationships can be amazingly important. Clever people have swabbed the faces and the bellies of moths, and they've run them through DNA barcoding to see where they've been or what plants they're interacting with. They're far less fussy than bees. Bees are desperately fussy. They're very efficient, but they're very fussy, whereas moths are far less so. And they'll do a whole host of stuff. Clovers, for example, or woodland plants. A lot of the less showy flowers will be pollinated by our moths. I'm of an age where the Joshua tree was the thing, you know, when it came out. My God, it was amazing. But the Joshua tree is an iconic tree in America, in the deserts of Nevada and all the rest of it. But it can only now be pollinated by one single species of moth. And you see that with orchids worldwide. There's a whole load of orchids which can only be pollinated. They have such specific, specialized, evolved relationships with moths that they can only be pollinated by one specific species of moth. They're not doing very well. 50% decline. Insect catastrophe. And it's all the usual stuff. And we won't get depressed looking at all of this, but that's the reality. And all the stuff that you know about that's affecting, it's not peculiar to the moths, of course, you know. Non-natives, you know, biocontrol, you know. Every single one of your gardens will have light brown apple moth in them, okay? Very small little species, all year round. Originates in Australia, you know, came in with imported plants. I've got American moths. I've got New Zealand tree fern-related moths in our woodlands now. You saw on the news there not so long ago, oak processionary moth, which belongs on trees down in the Mediterranean basin. If we're importing stuff and plants and we're not quarantining them properly and having improper controls, then inevitably you're going to get, inverted commas, alien species, you know. And the thing, above all else with the moths, of course, is that they're a very ancient clade, you know, like 100 million years. They've faced climate change before. You know, they've faced rising sea levels. I mean, Dingle Peninsula was underwater once. But what they have never faced in all those millions of years, they've never faced the soaking, the flooding of our night with light. And you can imagine how dark things were. Even 50 years ago, my parents can remember the lights being turned off in Cork City in the middle of the night. You know, I can remember seeing the Milky Way from my bedroom in Youghal. No chance now, you know. So it's naive to think that flooding the night sky, polluting, spillage, light spillage, will not have an effect on an insect which has evolved in the real pitch dark. You know how dark it was 100 years ago, 500, 1,000 years ago, 1,000,000 years ago. And this has a catastrophic effect on insect numbers. That last, you know, quote there, I mean, it makes sobering reading. We can do the usual stuff, you know, we know this. Conservation is about getting up off our arses and actually doing something. Stop giving out about stuff, do something, you know. You know, and you can just have a small patch of ground or low ground or whatever, but there's always ways to be, you know, native planting and be messy. We're talking about the native stuff. Some of the non-native plants are fantastic at giving off nectar. So I have verbena, which is non-native in my garden. It's covered in butterflies. But of course, with non-native plants, you're not getting the caterpillars feeding on them. So just a mixture of stuff is the thing. And I would plead with you to embrace the dark side, you know. We're talking about the lights earlier. Well, turn off the outside lights. Turn off the porch lights, you know. Can you have them as on timers? Can you have them properly focused down? You know, can you maybe pressure on your councillors? All of this stuff. Jim Wilson, I don't know, do you know him? He's a fantastic ornithologist. Well, he was perplexed when the council put up new LED streetlights down his road in Cove. But he got on to the councillors, and there is pressure on councils, and everybody wants to be green nowadays. And do you know what? They came out and they put small little plastic battens just to focus the light better. You need some night light. I get that. Of course you do, for safety and for road traffic and all the rest of it. But, you know, there are certain things that are under your control. So I would plead with you for that. And the last slide, you know, going back to our Kerry moth, and I wish it had an Irish name. The sandhill rustic is a group, or is a species of moth which is found all around Europe, okay? But it's amazing because it has these incredibly isolated populations, and one of them is in Dingle, and it looks entirely different to the other ones. It's still a subspecies, but that may change with better DNA and all the rest of it. First identified 1962, and it's found only on sea cliffs. It feeds on sheep fescue, which is a type of grass, on the sandstone cliffs. And there it is on the left. Surveying for it can be a bit of a scary business, but it's special. It's only found from Dunqueen to Inch on those cliffs there, nowhere else in the whole wide world. which is amazing. So thank you. It's been a privilege. I've just loved it. I love sharing, and you're such a fabulous group to come and to listen, and we might show the Moths some love. Thank you.
Stephen, thank you so much for that. It was so interesting. I have this vision of those, it was a 200 million moths a day.
Any number, that'll do
That's
fine.
staggering. But are they feed for migrating birds or anything?
Well, you know what? When they're coming from the continent to these islands, they're up high in the jet stream, you know. But when they land, absolutely. I mean, wow. they are. It is game on, you know. I suppose migration in insects, it's more of a dispersal. That's the way to think about it. So they're just like on the continent. And I don't know if you next time you're on holidays, if you're down and you can go walk at night time, and the numbers of moths on the continent are phenomenal. They're continuously brooding. Whereas in Ireland we just have like one brood. And so, you know, they run out of food plant, and then there's this insatiable, unavoidable drive for them genetically just to fly up and north.
Amazing. One other kind of nerdy question. The word moth, do you know where that comes from?
No, I don't. I think, actually, just talking about that, Irish does have its own word for moth, lawn, which is quite distinct, you know, for the Irish for butterfly. But sometimes words like that are actually not all moths, but a specific moth. And that's my understanding with the word moth comes from mota, which was actually for brimstone moth, which is a very specific type of moth. And it then just became a sort of...
Thanks a million.
Thank you.
Okay, we're going to do a quick Q&A for 10 minutes, so if anybody has any questions for Stephen, we'd be delighted to hear them.
Stephen, thank you. Really interesting talk.
Thank you.
I have starlings nesting on my site at the moment, and they seem to be getting lots of caterpillars from trees. Would you have any idea what the caterpillars would come from? They're doing very well at the moment. I have about 3
glad to hear
nests.
that. The winter moth is one of the ones that are particularly common, and that's probably one of those ones there, you know. So some species of moth are incredibly specific to a particular tree. They'll only feed on spindle, they'll only feed on oaks. Other ones are quite generalist. The winter moth is very interesting because its females are flightless. So if you're going to have no wings as a female, well, then you're only going to be able to lay the eggs, you know, within 10 meters or whatever where you were born, which is incredible. So the solution to that, and winter moth are found everywhere, they're in every corner of Ireland and all over Europe, but the solution what they have is, and you'll see this in your trees oftentimes when you're walking in the woods, was that when the caterpillars start eating around, then they'll often dangle down. They'll dangle down in a single little bit of silk, and they're just waiting for the wind to blow them like a parachute. So if the females can't fly to disperse the species, well, then the caterpillars will take this as a way of doing it, which is cool.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. That was incredible.
Thank
Really,
you.
really interesting. If people want to get more involved with community collection or adding to a national database or something like that, how can they get involved?
Yeah, that's great. There are very few so-called moth recorders around, of course. And I think that, well, first of all, it's so much easier now than it used to be. I mean, you have fantastic resources online. There's some great guidebooks. There's a great community. The Moths Ireland Facebook site is fantastic. And, you know, if you have something, you know, what you can do is that if there's a moth flitting around in your bathroom at night with the windows open, if you see it, why don't you put it in a glass and let it calm down? You can even put it in the fridge if it's flitting around like mad, and that's like just a cold night, and it'll calm down. And then look at it closely, and even the brown ones, actually, when you look at them closely, they're amazing. And you can photograph that with your phone, and you can post it on the Moths Ireland website, and you get a reply instantly. And then from that then will grow, and you can be looking more and more, and then online you need a license to trap, but that's free and it's easy, and that can be, all that information is readily available through the Moths Ireland site. And yeah, good luck.
Anybody else?
They're all mothed out, I think.
Does the coast affect moths? I mean, would we?
Oh, we have wonderful coastal moths. We have a whole ton of species that are only found on the coast. The sandhill rustic moth that I just showed you, that can actually withstand being soaked, and actually not so much our species, because our subspecies are specifically on the cliffs, but the other subspecies are found in quite low-lying coastal locations. They can be flooded with salt water, and they can put up with actually being submerged in the water. We have species of wainscot moth, which actually live in reeds, okay, but they actually live under the water line, and they'll use those reeds, the caterpillars, like a snorkel, breathing in air, but it's actually underwater. So we have fantastic, and Inchbeach, I was so pleased to hear Inchbeach obviously is now in all our hands in public ownership, you know, and that's just the best news. There's some incredibly rare species on Inchbeach, some of the best populations of Portland moth in the whole of the verticommas, the British Isles, are found at Inchbeach. So to answer your question, the coast is an incredibly rich area for moths, a lot of species that are found nowhere else except on the coast, and different species inhabiting the salt marshes, to the sand dunes, to the shingle, to the cliffs.
I suppose for us, and I'm sorry I'm not trying to hog the conversation, but Wildmine really for us is about taking time out and to have people like yourself who've put a lot of effort and thought and passion into what you're doing, and coming back and telling us just how much we have and how much we're losing. I mean, you said 50%. We've had talks, you know, we had Sean Renane telling about how many birds that are red listed and amber listed, and all those lists go on. But to me, we live in this amazing planet, and the amount of stuff that we have, and I mean, just you're telling us about moths. Their whole life cycle is so incredible. That alone could keep us here for the day. I mean, so we have so much to save and to appreciate. So, you know, for you to come and tell us this has just been really enriching.
Thank you. Thank you.
Genuinely.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.